Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today, I have a really cool episode for you featuring a vintage Seiko. A little bit about the brand. They were founded back in 1881. They are Japanese in origin and now have factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry level to high end. And in terms of the type of watch, this is a chronograph, some key common characteristics and design language you're looking for a chronograph. You're going to have, of course, external pushers to activate timing functions, multiple subdials to measure elapsed time, often featuring additional scales dependent on the subgenre. In this case, you can see that tachymeter scale on that aluminum bezel insert. Now, this is a very cool vintage piece sourced from Belmont Watches here locally in San Diego. So big shout out to them for lending this into the channel. This is circa 1970s. It is a brown Bullhead Speedtimer and it is cool. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand and take a closer look. Okay guys, so you can see very original in terms of its condition. This hasn't been, overworked or anything. This really is quite a handsome piece and it definitely has those early Seiko vibes. Check that out. I love the dial. It has a bit of a fume appearance to it, kind of a tropical appearance. And then of course the gold brushed subdials, as well as having that brushed gold frame around the really beautifully aligned day and date. And you can see the day wheel does have the kanji option, so you can be English or kanji, which is very, very cool. The reason why this is called the Bullhead, of course, it's because everything's at the head of the watch, kind of like a bull's horns, right? So normally you would have something more like this in terms of where it would be laid out. Here, it's actually really smart. I'm surprised why, more brands don't do something like that. But I think it's just we kind of got used to the 3 o'clock crown. I feel like something like this, having the crown up here, of course, it does kind of offset the way that you do have to do the case. It makes it a little bit more asymmetrical from this angle. As you can see, there's a bit of a tilt, but it's really cool and very unique. Of course, there are other Bullhead options that are out there, whether it be from Seiko or from Citizen, and even Modern Citizen. Modern Seiko, a lot of the Speedtimers are not necessarily in the Bullhead configuration, but who knows what could come down the line. So this one is kind of in a really interesting middle space where it's not necessarily like super duper collectible, which means it's also not super duper expensive. You can actually get this one from Belmont Watches for $600. So once I saw that price tag, I was like, I really need to get that into the channel before somebody buys it, because I would love to share this, because a lot of the times the stuff that gets lent in can be very, very expensive or very limited. So I think something like this, really should resonate with a lot of you. So a little bit about the dimensions. So this is going to be 43.5 millimeters across, 14.6 millimeters thick, and that's centered, right? Like, I guess it could be slightly thicker if I was to measure there, but at center mass, it's 14.6. Lug to lug, right about 45 millimeters, and that's basically from this flat point to this edge here. So very, very nice in terms of the sizing. All stainless steel. Of course, it is brushed and does have a bit of polish on there that has been pretty worn. But it's one of those things. This is a wearer. This is not one that you're going to throw in a safe and baby. That's the nice thing, is that it's already worn. It already has a lot of character, and you can add to that. It actually has 20 millimeter hooded lugs, so you could swap this out. I would have to if I was to purchase this, just because I have a larger wrist, and this bracelet is probably going to be something that would fit somebody with a 7 1/4 inch wrist better than somebody with a 7 1/2 inch wrist. So very nice, but we do have a push-pull crown here at the 12 o'clock. Then we have the pushers. Very nice. Everything functions beautifully. We'll let that run so you get a bit of visual interest, because if you might have noticed, there is no running seconds subdial, which is cool because there's no hacking. So that actually works and kind of helps things out. So smart on Seiko's part. Getting into the movement, which you can't see, but you can see this lovely case back. Actually, if you follow the link in the description, you'll see they popped off the case back and got a shot of the movement. Of course, you guys might know, if you followed this particular reference, you know these are some of the most faked Seikos that are out there, and for good reason. I mean, they're good looking watches, but they popped it open. You see the Seiko movement and everything like that. The movement that's inside is the 6138. It has a 45-hour power reserve, beats at 3 hertz, so it's only going to be 21,600 vibrations per hour in terms of its beat rate, but that totally works fine, especially considering it doesn't have a running seconds hand. So ooh, very pretty. So we'll let that run again. Getting into the dial, you can see it is very, very nice and crisp there in terms of the printing, very crisp. And there were various, depending on the year, and in terms of the text on the dial. Some will have Seiko 5, some won't, some will say Speedtimer, some I think there's even some that say like chronograph on there. So there's a couple different variations, which also probably made it easier for them to fake these because there are so many options there. But hey, the good news is this one's already been popped open. Looks legit. You get this really cool tropical brown dial, and those indices do appear to be applied as far as I can tell, and I would think that this is probably before they could even punch them from the back with such precision like they can do with today's dials. So very old school. I don't believe that these are loomed. I think it's just white for contrast, but we'll see when we get to the low light transition portion. And I really just love this tropical brown kind of fume dial. I love the layout in terms of that kanji English disc for the day function. And then, of course, the date right there, 6 o'clock. Very, very nice. And it all balances itself out really well. A lot of symmetry going on here. So I really, really like that. You do get, of course, the brushed gold chronograph subdials. So those are really, really cool. I love the brushing on there. It does catch the light really beautifully. And again, it just ties into this warm vintage aesthetic. Very, very 70s. And then, of course, the hands are painted for contrast so you can read it. This is listed as just having water resistance. So we're going to go with splash resistant. If it was any more resistant than that, it would be listed. So let's just not submerge this in water ever. Okay, now in terms of the bracelets, it is original. As you can see here, 3-link with the very thin center link, wider outer links. It has a flare that's about 21 millimeters that tapers down to 16. So really nice. And you can see, you know, in terms of the construction, really old school, but it is very solid. But it is also, of course, going to be very, there's a lot of movement in there, which means it's going to be very comfortable, but it's not going to be super supportive for such a heavy piece. The nice thing is it does have 20 millimeter lugs, so you can't put this on other pieces. So I should say on other strap options, but because the lugs are hooded, that is going to kind of limit just a bit in terms of what types of straps you're going to be able to fit in there, because it's going to be a tight squeeze if you have a thicker strap. If you have a thinner strap, it'll work fine, but just remember that it is a bit thicker. The good news is at 20 millimeters, you should have quite a few options that will work for you. So let's see what's left. Oh, the clasp. So it is a stamped friction clasp there with tons of different micro adjust holes there. I believe 5 total manual micro adjust holes, and of course this is period correct, and it definitely works. So let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, so I can't close the clasp on here again. It's a little bit too tight. So if you have a 7.5 inch wrist or above, just know that this OEM bracelet, although very handsome and flows really well, it probably won't fit on your wrist. But you can see it actually suits the wrist really nicely. It sits on the wrist. I'll try to hold it so it doesn't go flying off. But you can see there, even with its thicker profile, it just flows and sits really well. And honestly, if you were to get something today, 14.6 millimeters for an automatic chronograph ain't bad. So this actually wears its thickness really well, and especially with all of those signature contours from Seiko. You're not going to get a flat, side slab. You're going to get a lot of contouring there, a lot of beautiful shapes that are going to flow, and of course play with the light. Of course, if I get my wrist too close to the camera, you're going to get some perspective distortion, and it's going to seem much larger than it really is. But if I just leave my wrist down here, you can see that it's going to be a little bit truer in terms of its aspect ratio. So I'll just tighten up the frame here and let you guys get a more detailed look while still having it appear quite nice. And you can see it doesn't seem oversized at all, not one bit. It seems really well sized. And I don't have a super flat wrist, even though my wrist is a little larger at 7.5 inches. It's rounder because it's pretty tall from this aspect. So it's not like I have a big flat wrist. It's going to be flattering for any large watch. Honestly, watches are probably going to look quite large on my wrist versus somebody with a flatter 7.5 inch wrist. But you can see here, this is just a really handsome piece. Whew. It just, I enjoy the light play, the simplicity, the color palette is just 1970s, muscle car, period correct. Very, very nice. I do enjoy this quite a bit, but let's go ahead and get it off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, this sucker does not have any loom, but it's not a dive watch, so it doesn't really matter. I don't know if the loom is dead on it or if it never had any loom. I don't know enough about this model, but let me know down in the comments. What I will say is when I get into this low light transition, look how stinking gorgeous those subdials are. They just catch the light. And even without loom, with minimal lighting here, you're seeing that there is enough contrast on the dial to still make this really, really quite legible. Look at the way the light glides over that vertical brush. Ooh, very cool. So yeah, I do like to incorporate, of course, low light transition because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or maybe just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some harsh lighting, which typically could expose any types of production defects. But all you're going to see here is just exposing a lot of the wear and tear on this piece. Again, it's not a minty fresh example, but it is a well-worn, well-running example, which I think is cool. It's nice to sometimes dabble within these less collectible pieces that you can actually treat like a tool watch and wear it like a tool watch and not give it too much thought. Look at how gorgeous that dial play is. Ooh, I would love to see Seiko do something modern on this. It doesn't have to necessarily be a bullhead layout. I get it. That would be pretty tough in terms of modifying the complications within the movement. But I think this colorway, though, is just something to appreciate. That does definitely have a very era specific, but still quite Seiko-esque, color scheme to it. I do enjoy it very, very much. Closing thoughts, guys. While, of course, this is naturally going to be pretty bulky, it still doesn't feel oversized for an automatic chronograph. I mean, that's let's just face it, they did a good job with their ergonomics, and it's Seiko, so it's kind of what you would expect. In terms of model variants, this was also originally available with a black and blue color combination versus this brown and gold colorway. Of course, this is the one that's available from Belmont Watches in the link in the description if you are interested. In terms of comparable models, well, you can get modern quartz offerings that, you know, recapture a similar aesthetic. I would say it's still really cool to be able to kind of purchase an original for not too much, like $600. I've seen Mecha Quartz powered watches that aren't even made by Seiko that go for more than $600. So of course there are going to be much cheaper options that are out there that, you know, let's say go from Citizen that really capture that retro aesthetic, but they're definitely not going to be mechanical chronographs, let alone, you know, hey, this actual vintage appeal that you're going to get, like truly vintage appeal in the way that it's been worn and faded, and it just, the way it just captures a whole story. So for me, guys, bottom line, at just $600 from a reputable seller, might I add, a big shout out to Belmont Watches. This offers a ton of value for really not a lot of money and a lot of nostalgia, depending on who, you know, you're buying this for, or if you're buying it for yourself. Maybe it's, I could just see a guy with, you guys, if you're car savvy, you might remember there was a really kind of pukish gold GTO back in the day. That was the 70s, later 70s, yeah, I believe. And man, I could just see this right there. You know, it's just, there's something about it. This really just goes with that, and I don't know, it's just a lot of fun. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.